Today we're going to be talking about the Sony FX3. It's a brand new camera in Sony's FX lineup of cameras. So obviously this is a very video focused system. I'm actually filming on it right now. So you can see this as kind of sample footage from the camera. We've also been out and about. We've had it for about 24 hours. So not loads of time, but I've kind of tried to make the most of it, especially in the rain and the gray and stuff like that. But filming it right now means we get a little bit more sample footage in this video as well. And actually, it's been a very pleasant camera to actually film on. It shares a huge amount in common with the A7S III, which is interesting because I loved that camera, for one. I really loved using the A7S III. In terms of specs, there's a lot of overlap. We're gonna get into all of that in a little bit, but there are some differences as well. So for example, right now, I am using the XLR adapter, which sits on top of the handle on top of the camera. And that allows me to plug in my microphone, which is just above me here, and actually run that straight into the camera. So I don't have to kind of sync up audio, which is what I'd normally do with an external sound recorder. I can do it all straight into the camera. It's way easier to work that way. There's no microphone built into the camera, but to be honest, that's really not that big a deal. You usually only use that for scratch audio anyway, so using that in my case to sync up that audio with the audio from my mic so that I can get a nice kind of synced up video and sound. But if you're plugging the mic straight into the camera anyway, straight into the XLR adapter, it really doesn't matter. Some of the other differences, obviously the handle on top means there's no viewfinder on the camera. That's not a huge surprise. Most videographers aren't so keen or don't necessarily need a viewfinder. I did like the viewfinder on the A7S III. It was particularly awesome actually, but I understand why it's not on this camera. Now that's probably gonna be a personal preference, whether you used it on the A7S III or whether you would use it or whether you're not fussed at all. If you're coming from something like the FX6 or the FX9 and you want to use this as a B cam, no problem at all. You're not going to be worried about that at all. And you've still got the flip out screen on the side as well, which is actually super useful, especially right now. I can see myself, which is very handy. There's a tally light, so I know that the camera's recording, so no nasty surprises when I come to check the footage later. And I can see there's a little green square around my eye as well, because the eye autofocus is tracking me as I film this, which is always very handy. It means I don't have to worry about the focus. I don't have to worry that later, when I come to review this footage, everything is out of focus. So like I say, there's a lot of spec overlap with the A7S III. So for example, you've got the 4K up to 120 frames a second in this camera. You've got 10-bit 422 video. You're gonna be able to match things like color with things like the FX6, the FX9, which makes things very handy for production houses, whether you're a freelancer kind of working alongside them or whether you are a production house and you actually want to get maybe a smaller, lighter, maybe a stunt camera, anything like that. This is going to be a great B cam for those cameras, but it's also a fantastic camera for kind of a solo operator. I think that's probably where it's going to find its biggest audience, is in a solo freelance videographer. This has so much capability in it. And actually, I was a little bit skeptical about how much this handle would make a big deal, right? The handle on top of the camera. But to be completely honest with you, it actually is really handy, no pun intended, for when you're out shooting. Whether you're doing client work, commercial work, out and about, running and gunning a shoot is a lot easier with that handle. And actually, if you want to run kind of a shotgun mic on top of the camera, the XLR adapter is super handy. Having it all there, kind of ready, negates the need for something like a cage, which you might put on the A7S III, and that kind of balances things out a little bit. I would almost certainly use a cage for the A7S III. And when you factor that in and then setting things up with maybe an adapter or having an external sound recorder or anything like that, the price difference between the two really starts to even out. So for a solo videographer or like a one-person team doing video, this is a really good option. In terms of video, obviously it has all the things that you would expect from the A7S III, which is a really good suite of video options. 4K, 25, 24, 30 frames a second, all the way up to 120 frames a second, which gives that nice slow motion. 10-bit 422. It has an HDMI port where you can output 16-bit RAW if you've got something like an Atomos or something like that. All of these things make it very useful and very versatile for all kinds of different video. 4K 120 fits seamlessly, certainly into my workflow for the kind of stuff that I do, but I would imagine that is something that's going to be very useful, just like on the A7S III, for all kinds of videographers. It just allows you a lot of versatility, especially in post-production. 4K allows you to crop a little bit, add a slow zoom, all kinds of things. The image stabilization in the camera is very, very good. I was using it completely handheld, and I was really happy with the smooth shots I was getting. It was actually helped by that handle on the top. I think I've mentioned this probably 100 times now, but that handle is very easy to use in terms of getting smoother shots, which is a nice plus to have. And then of course you could pop this camera on a gimbal if you want to get incredibly smooth cinematic shots, but obviously as a run and gun situation, which this camera is perfect for because of the size, it actually works really well with the image stabilization. Autofocus is of course something that, as you would expect, works almost flawlessly. It is ridiculous at this point how good the Sony autofocus is. Eye autofocus, absolutely no problem. Tracking, absolutely no problem. So if you're filming yourself, like in this situation, there's a green square around my eye, super easy. Filming my subject, Matilda, who I use for all kinds of videos, super easy because it would track her eye, and then if it lost her eye, it would just track her. Really impressive stuff. And it makes kind of filming and stuff, especially as, again, a one-person team, super easy and just a lot easier, and takes a lot of the stress out of it so you can focus on your camera work, your composition, all that kind of stuff. In terms of the design and the build of the camera, it feels very solid. It feels very well made. It feels like it could probably take a little bit of punishment. I'm not going to test that out, I'm not crazy, but it feels like it probably could take a little bit of punishment. And certainly in terms of the button placement, it's very ergonomic. You've got things like the record button on the top of the camera. You've got the nice red square around the back on the screen, so you know when it's recording and when it's not. You've got the tally lights on the front, obviously, as well. Things like zebra and peaking are all just at the touch of a button. So really easy to actually use, especially if you're running and gunning a shoot and you've limited time. You're not going to be spending ages fiddling with the camera. It has the new menus, which we saw on the A7S III, which personally I really like. I think they're very intuitive. I think they're easy to kind of get to grips with, easy to navigate through. Everything seems to be exactly where you would think that it would be, which is great. Now there is another difference that we haven't mentioned between the FX3 and the A7S III, and that's the built-in fan in the body of the FX3. Now this makes it a little bit bigger and a little bit heavier as well, although in realistic terms, I didn't actually notice the difference myself, but it is a touch heavier. But it does mean that it's very reliable when it comes to overheating. Now that's not to say that the A7S III had any problems with that were hugely noticeable. I used that on pretty much the hottest day of the year last year and I never had any issues with it at all. But it's nice to have that peace of mind with the FX3, especially since it's part of the cinema lineup of cameras with things like the FX6 that you might be using it with. And if you're using it on a longer shoot, you can be nice and assured that you're not going to have any overheating issues. Ultimately, I think this camera is a great option for production houses, for solo videographers, someone looking to do nice professional video work. This is going to give you a lot of options for how you want to film, the end result you can get, and because of the size and the weight of it, it is very usable. You know, it's a lot smaller and lighter than things like the FX6, but it offers a huge amount. Obviously, there's a huge amount of overlap there with the A7S III, but I think this offers a slightly different kind of feel. You know, with that handle, with the XLR adapter, I think that works really well as a very dedicated video system. It's going to be a great B cam to those FX6, FX9, all that kind of stuff. Of course, you can check out the full spec for yourself. You can see the camera for yourself, all that stuff, the price, everything, by following the link down in the description. If you have any questions about the camera, of course, pop it down in the comments below. Obviously, we didn't have a huge amount of time with it, so there's a bit of a limited amount we could actually do with it, but absolutely, I'm hoping to get my hands on it again at some point in the future, maybe with an FX6, and we can kind of do some direct comparisons, kind of work with both of them together, maybe do an A7S III versus the FX3 kind of thing. Maybe we'll have a look at that. That would be fantastic. But of course, until then, make sure to like and subscribe because there's all new stuff all the time, tutorials, reviews, all kinds of stuff. I will see you in the next video. And as always, thanks for watching.